Magandang hapon, everyone. Welcome to the second season of PUSO2PUSO, a podcast program where we invite Filipinx healthcare professionals to answer your pre-health questions. I am one of your hosts, Justine Mika-Legaspi, or Mika, pronoun she, her.
I am also one of your hosts, Kara Oravillo, she, her, and for our episode today, we have a very special guest. Not only was she one of our teacher's assistants for Bio 99, but she is a PhD candidate here at UCI for neuroscience.
Thank you for joining us today. And Jess, would you like to give us more background on yourself?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Jessica Noche Lingad, and I am a PhD student here at UCI, a neuroscience PhD student. So for a little bit of background, so I was born and raised in California my whole life, originally in the Bay Area, but I moved to Southern California as a kid. So I've pretty much been down here my whole life. I graduated from Corona High School a long time ago in 2009, and I went to Fullerton College after that. I was a pre-nursing major for the first year and took the prereq classes like intro bio, chem, psychology, anatomy. But then I had a change of heart and wanted to become a marriage and family therapist. Not really knowing what the requirements were for that, but either way, I switched my major to psychology, and then I transferred to UCI after finishing community college in 3 years. So I did my undergrad at UCI, and then, I've been at UCI for a while, but UCI kind of exposed me to actual academic research for the first time. And I realized being here that I was at a top tier research institution. And the classes that I took were led by professors who conducted really cool research on campus. So I took classes like brain disorders with Dr. Alyssa Brewer, like principal learning theory, writing about memory with Dr. Charlie Chubb, and other classes in the cognitive science department. So I really enjoyed learning about how the brain really supports not only our ability to function and survive, but also it gives rise to who we are as individuals. So I thought that was really cool to marry the concepts of biology and anatomy that I learned with psychology in one field, neuroscience. But even still with that, neuroscience is such a broad field. But yeah, so a little bit more on my background. So to keep going, I became a research assistant in one of the labs here on campus. It was in the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. You might notice this building that's right next to the BioSci library. But I was really intrigued by the title of this building because I was really interested in neurobio and learning and memory. So I went online and looked at what labs they had, and then found Dr. Michael Yas's lab. And then I sent an email to ask if I can be a research assistant. And I was already a senior at this point, so pretty late in the game, but I still wanted to get that experience. And so from then on, I became a research assistant, and I was working on behavioral studies, looking at memory mechanisms in aging and Alzheimer's disease, and then also MRI studies. And then I got hired on as a lab manager. So I spent 3 years as a lab manager there after I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology. And then I decided to apply to grad school. So that's where I am now.
Thank you so much for sharing more about yourself. I think it's really interesting to hear about kind of how you changed your path several times, and it's really cool to see where you are now. And since you kind of started talking about your research already, can you tell us a little more about your work at Stark Labs? Please feel free to share as much information as you feel comfortable and elaborate as much as you'd like.
Sure, yeah. So in the Stark Lab, as a graduate student research scientist, I participate in research studies that focus on understanding different features of the brain that are involved in long-term memory, and how those mechanisms become affected in aging and in Alzheimer's disease. And we use techniques in MRI and also advanced statistical and computational methods, so that we can make sense of what these MRI measurements are telling us about the healthy and diseased brain, and also how it relates to our memory abilities. And also, the hope for all of this type of research is so that we can develop more powerful diagnostic tools to better classify individuals who might be more at risk for Alzheimer's disease or memory impairments, so that we could better stratify them into clinical trials.
Thank you for explaining. And I know that although I did assist for a couple quarters in the lab, I really appreciate you giving more of a specific take on what you specifically did. And going into your career, can you tell us something about research in biotech that you really liked and then you thought, like, this is something I want to do for a very long time?
Yeah, so what I really like about it is that it allows for a lot of independent thinking. So being in a PhD program, it's very unique in that no other grad student in your program is doing exactly what you're doing. You're in a laboratory, you have very specific questions that you formulate yourself, and that's supported by your advisor, and you're making new discoveries in your field. And specifically for me, it's really cool that I'm in the intersection of healthcare and technology, to be able to identify diagnostic tools and insights into clinical trials in the future. So I really like that I'm still in healthcare without actually being a healthcare professional. Like I take care of no one. I can barely take care of myself, but I'm still contributing to the improvement of healthcare and identifying therapeutics and medicines. So that's something that was important to me given my family background and everything.
Yeah, I really like what you said about kind of being at the intersection of healthcare and biotechnology. I know a lot of people, at least in PUSO, are kind of teetering along the lines of whether they want to be actually taking care of people, but still wanting to be involved in healthcare. So I think that's something that's going to be really effective for them to hear. And kind of just going more in depth to kind of your work and what you're doing for your schooling, can you give us a run through of what a typical day looks like for you?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, no one grad student's job is the same as anyone else's. Every day is totally, totally different. But because of that, skills like time management and project management ended up becoming really critical skills in graduate school that no one really talks about, but they're super underestimated. But they're really valuable for success throughout your training and in your career. But some of the things that I do in it's hard to say what a typical day is, but I'll just explain what could possibly happen. So I could be conducting different analyses on an existing data set we have in the lab. So I mentioned that most of my work is computational. So I work with data of MRI images, and these involve working with thousands, if not millions, of data points that are within an MRI image, and processing the images, making sense of what we're seeing, what we're measuring, and also combining that with behavioral measures, memory measures, clinical measures of disease progression. So I also collaborate with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here on campus, because they do a lot of longitudinal studies with older adult community members who come and participate to better understand Alzheimer's disease. But they go and visit a neurologist every year here on campus, and they get blood draws and a whole evaluation annually. So my lab collaborates with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, so I get access to the data from these patients, so I can actually see clinical data, and then we bring them in for MRI scanning, and then I can make all those connections with trying to understand the properties of the Alzheimer's disease brain. So along with collaborating with other institutions here on campus, a lot of my work also involves programming. So I do computer programming in Python, and I work in Linux environments. So I know how to write bash scripts. Just because we work with such large amounts of data, you need to know how to automate it instead of doing things manually, the ancient way. So programming became a skill that I picked up in graduate school, and it is a very valuable skill to have, even I mean, these days I recommend that everyone learn a little bit of programming, but along with that, I also have to constantly learn like new analysis packages that are coming out and new software that's coming out, because MRI is constantly evolving. The technology in that realm is constantly changing, and there's new ways to look at the data. So there's always something to learn with that. Another thing I could be doing in my day is experimental design. So I'm pretty far along in my training already. So I'm not on the design side anymore. I'm kind of more on the late end of the research, which is more of the analysis and the interpretation of my findings. But if I am on the earlier side of experimental design, I would be reading the recent literature to see, you know, what's out there already, what discoveries are being made, what's kind of hot in the field right now, and then trying to test out different parameters. So when I go to the MRI, it's not just like a standard sequence that we collect on the brain, on scanning the brain. We actually try to build upon and optimize the MRI sequences so that we have more cutting edge techniques for how to image the brain at a like higher resolution, faster acquisition times, and all of these things. So I would spend a lot of time troubleshooting those different parameters at the MRI scanner. I would like recruit friends and family to come and just be like a volunteer subject really quick so I can set up the brain sequences. And then once that's all set up, I would recruit participants to come in and do my studies. I might have them do some cognitive testing and then also have them do some special brain scans that I just set up. Other things, lots of leadership opportunities in being a PhD student. So I recruit and advise undergraduate research assistants in the lab because I need a lot of help with my work, and I also like to mentor. So I have a couple research assistants who are doing their own independent projects, but also helping me with some of mine. Other things that I do that I could do in the day, this is a lot of days, but at this point, but interpreting my results. So after doing, statistical analyses on my data, I would try to make sense of it all, see how it might line up or disagree with the current existing literature out there. And then presenting these findings at like lab meetings, seminars, or attending conferences, which are always really fun and exciting because you get to talk to other scientists who might be doing something similar to you, and they could exchange ideas with you about, what you could be doing better or how we could work together, or, ideas for new experiments. And then, after that, when you have your project, you tell a really cool story with your data, you can publish on it. And that's kind of the end goal for a lot of your work. You want to put it out there into the world so it actually makes a difference. And it's not just sitting in the lab on a computer that no one sees. So writing papers is the final kind of step there. So yeah, everything else in between, there's lots of different professional development opportunities throughout. But that's like in the shortest way possible I could explain what I kind of do on a day-to-day.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things that I really like about the research field is that it's very independent, but also like you work with a lot of other people, and in that there's a lot of creativity as well. So thank you for sharing. I know it's like a lot to detail, also like the day in a life. So thank you for being very specific with it too.
Sure.
So shifting gears and speaking in reference to our Bio 99 class last summer, can we ask how your experience as a TA helped shape your work in research? And if there are any other experiences that are not directly related either, you can share those as well.
As a TA, it's pretty independent from what I do as a researcher. I'd say the biggest benefit that I've gotten from being a TA has been to better distill concepts that and really test my knowledge. So I think being able to teach somebody a really difficult concept really requires that you yourself as the teacher understand everything like inside out, 100% backward and forward. And so sometimes you think you know something, and then when it's time to teach somebody, you're like, wait a minute, there's some gaps in my knowledge here. So I think TAing really kept me on my toes about a lot of the concepts. And I TA'd Bio 99, which was a molecular, was the title, what was it? Molecular biology.
Yes.
Right. And that is totally not my area. I'm telling you, I was a psych major and I not a bio major. And so a lot of the things I learned in my PhD, my first 2 years, that's what I ended up relying on to be able to TA that class. And so I was learning a lot along the way. So good thing I got the materials ahead of you guys, but I would be studying a lot of that beforehand so that I can be prepared. So I'd say that being a really good scientist also requires being a good mentor. It's kind of hand in hand, because mentorship really keeps you on your toes and teaching. So to really make sure that you really know your topic. But yeah, TAing is actually also a requirement for my PhD program. So I had finished all of my TA requirements already, and I've taught 3 classes total. I taught a neuroimaging lab, and then I taught Bio 99, and then I also taught a neurobiology lab for neurobio majors. I feel like no, that's it. I thought I taught one more, but that neurobiology class for neurobio majors was really heavy. So that felt like I don't know, 2 experiences of TAing, but it was just one big one. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing about that. If I remember correctly, and I'm sure Mika agrees, you were a fantastic TA. Like, we really appreciated all your help. And since that class was online, can we kind of ask about how the pandemic affected your career or any goals that you wish to pursue?
Yeah. So one way it affected my research was back in the beginning of the pandemic, the first year in 2020. It was a time where I was hitting a point in my experiment where I really needed to collect more data, which means I had to recruit more subjects, more older adult participants. But of course, because of all of the restrictions and like safety wise, we weren't allowed to recruit people to come onto campus and interact with them and bring them in for an MRI scan. So I couldn't do that. I had to just completely nix that part of my project, which set me back a little bit, but I'm pretty lucky that the type of lab I'm in is all of it is computerized data, so it's not like I have to be in lab doing any kind of wet bench work. So the job I do in my lab is really, it adapts well to be able to work from home. So we transitioned to working from home, and I was able to get a lot done still. But what it did help me realize is that the skills for work-life balance when you're in one context all the time, like at home, it's really tough to juggle, because you can't dissociate yourself from work when your work environment is the same as your home environment, and it's the place where you're supposed to be able to relax. And so it's hard to know where the boundaries are for when you're done with work. But I kind of learned how to keep a solid structure. And now I think I would prefer remote work. I don't want to go back. So now that I'm kind of on the job hunt, I'm looking for jobs that can be hybrid or purely remote. Those are a little bit more rare, but at least the hybrid would be good. And especially being in tech, there are a lot more opportunities for that. So, or planning to go into tech.
Thank you for that. I know as a student, it's we relate as well, because learning from home is very challenging. And then also separating that from our school and relaxation. It is a juggle as well. So we totally get how you are feeling. And it's very interesting to see how that is on a graduate student level. So since you have a lot of experience regarding your career, If someone were to be interested in pursuing your career, what advice would you like to give them? And if there's something like specific also that you learned, you can share that too.
Yeah, okay. So I have a lot to share, and this is the part that I'm most passionate about sharing because a lot of people really don't know what a PhD entails. And it's hard to know because they're all so different. And it's not every day that you just run into and encounter a PhD student. So one of the things I really want to drive home is the fact that a PhD is a very long journey. It's at least 5 years. But there's no really hard set time. And I'll go into that in a little bit, but I do want to say that because you would be investing so much time into learning, because you'd be investing so much time into a PhD, you really want to take time to learn what a PhD does and what the career options are for that. So depending on what area you go into, because you can go into a PhD in purely cognitive science or go more into, a medical kind of trajectory. I mean, there's all kinds of PhDs all over the map. But in terms of, specifically like bio kind of related, there are so many. So even in bioengineering, there's like biomedical engineering is a whole nother thing that's super exciting. That you'd really have to talk to those specific people about what their work entails, because what they say is not going to be what I say. My experience is. So to just really step out of your comfort zone and try to reach out to people who are graduate students in labs here on campus. And I think the best way to really do that is to go to each school, each school's website on, in the UCI, like huge web of websites. So there's the few main ones to look at are like the UCI School of Biological Sciences, and then also UCI School of Medicine. There's lots of different departments within those schools that do neuroscience research. So if that's what you want to go into. But also another like one-stop shop to find a neuroscience laboratory can be looking at the Center for Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, like what I mentioned earlier. That's how I got in, started to learn more about the neuroscience research here, because I like noticed that building that's next to BioSci. And this center was like actually the first of its kind in the whole world to be specifically dedicated to learning and memory. There was no other center like this. Like there would be like a psychology department and there would be like a biology department, but there was never a center that would look at learning and memory in a multidisciplinary way until UCI developed it, put it together in the 80s. So, and it was actually founded by Dr. Jim McGaw, who McGaw Hall is named after. So yeah, anyway, a little bit of history for you there, but you can check out their website. So it's CNLM, so that stands for Center for Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, .uci.edu. And you'll see all the different research activities and the different faculty who participate in it. You'll go to their websites, see their research topics, and then just reach out, like find their lab website and then like search for their grad students or their staff members or something, and then just send an email and ask about what they do. See if you can land like an informational interview, just a casual one, just to find out more. So you really won't know just by looking at their website. You really have to talk to them and figure that out. But I really encourage anyone who has any slight interest in science and being a scientist, or just knowing about research, to try and do that. It's totally worthwhile because grad students like to share their experiences, and they also like to look for research assistants. So if you have enough interest and you seem like you could be a reliable research assistant, they might even offer you a research position. So yeah, and then another piece of advice, because we're still on that topic, right? Okay, yeah. Is to take into account what career you want to have by the end of it. because you can pursue research, academic research as the career. Like what you do in grad school is like what you do forever. So you can, pursue a really traditional like tenure track academic research position where you might become a tenured professor at an institution where you do primarily research and land grants, like apply for grants and do all the research things that the professors do here on campus. Or you can take alternate careers, which a lot of people are doing these days, which is like going into different industries. Like you can become a medical writer, you can become lots of other different things like a data scientist, research science you can do research as a research scientist for lots of different types of companies, even businesses, even in financial companies too, because there's a lot to be said about understanding human behavior when it comes to making decisions. So there's lots of different ways you can apply your PhD out in the wild, in the world. And I do one last thing I want to mention about being in a PhD is that a PhD program is that it's unique from other kind of higher education professional degrees in that you get paid. So a lot of people don't know that, but once you enter a PhD program and then you join somebody's laboratory, they pay for your tuition and fees and everything. And then they even pay you a living stipend. So like enough money to help you get by, pay for rent and all of that. So because of this, you're kind of more like an employee. So you're doing real world research by this point. You're not just doing like practice research in a classroom for a classroom project. It's totally not like that. Everything you're doing is to the benefit of your advisor and of course to you, because you're training to be a good scientist. But like as soon as you step in the door, you're doing actual scientific research and you're trying to produce papers and findings for that laboratory while you are earning your PhD. So that's something that I think people don't know right off the bat, but that can be a huge decision-making kind of piece of information for people, because a lot of people don't want to be buried in debt going into these other different, medical professional, graduate programs. So it's nice because, for me, I've never had to pay to be in graduate school. And even halfway through in my third year, I got my master's. So I technically have my master's now in science, in biological sciences. So yeah, that's kind of what really, one of the main things I really wanted to drive home, because I think that people having to pay for their tuition and for these, higher education, for people's higher education is really like just gatekeeping. And the people who, really could make it, and if they're just stopped by the fact that they can't afford it, it's just so unfair. And so I really like the fact that you can make your way through and have a PhD by the end and be supported financially. But that comes with a lot of stressors too, because like you're also expected to try to apply for your own funding while you're here, because of course your advisor will pay for you through their funding if they have funding. So you have to find an advisor who has enough money in their lab, but they would like you to apply for your own funding through different mechanisms that are known. For example, the National Science Foundation has a graduate research fellowship program that funds like all of your years of research or your training. So like your fees and your tuition and all of that. And everyone's encouraged to apply to that. And I actually got that award, and it funded the last 3 years of my PhD training here. So my advisor didn't have to pay for me to be in his lab. So that was cool. And that always looks really good on your resume. And so yeah. But so because of the fact that a PhD program is it's not as paved and it's not as like prescripted as these other programs. It can be a little stressful because you're really paving your own way. You're finding an advisor, you're trying to like match with them, and then you're trying to find funding and all of that. So
thank you for giving us like a good like line of what we can follow as well, because I know though a lot of our viewers are interested in research, they don't really know the difference between how like to actually pursue it. And a lot of the specific points that you gave is something that I actually wanted to know as well. So we really appreciate your advice on that. And kind of leading into our next question, like we don't really see a lot of Filipinos in research and biotechnology. So can you give us a little bit of a tidbit on like how your background culturally has shaped or impacted your career goals?
yeah, for sure. So yeah, the fact that I'm within the realm of biotech and studying clinical diseases is definitely because of my upbringing. My mom was, of course, an RN. She's a retired registered nurse. And my older sister followed in her footsteps and became an RN also. My older brother is finishing up his program this summer to become a doctor in occupational therapy. So my whole family is very much in the medical field, and they would be more qualified to be invited to this podcast than I am, but because they actually take care of people and they're like medical health professionals. But I was the type that just like wanted to be different, and I was really lucky that my mom was really supportive of me. She never pushed me about like, you need to do nursing. I mean, I gave it a try. That was my first major, I was a pre-nursing major, but then I realized I didn't really like it. Like I liked the concepts of anatomy, and I thought like the inner workings of the body was super cool, but I really couldn't see myself being like a caring for patients. And it's just the stress of it. I mean, of course, all of our jobs are stressful, but like having someone's health in your hands is like really intense. And I don't know if I can, handle that. So I think it takes a lot of patience and real talent to be a healthcare professional. And it's important to recognize where your talents are. And I recognized that that wasn't my talent. So I really enjoyed like psychology and all of that. So that's how I started into that path. And then it got brought back into neuroscience to like really, get back into the whole biology bits. And another thing too was my grandma. I called her Nanai. I know everyone calls her Grandma Lola, but I call my grandma Nanai. She grew up with me. She was with us and lived with us my whole life. She came here to America to like take care of me. By the time I was born, my mom had no more hands to carry any more babies. So she brought my grandma over. And so, being raised by her my entire life, it was really difficult to see her develop dementia when I was in high school. So, I watched the whole thing go down, and it was really tough. And that was something that, once I started to learn more about neuroscience and then brain disorders and memory impairments, it became something that I connected to my own life because of my grandma having dementia. And that became really a passion of mine to learn more about it in any way that I could. And at UCI, there's so much Alzheimer's disease research happening. We're actually like a really top tier institution for studying Alzheimer's disease. Like a lot of people come from across the country to come do research here at UCI for that. And so I felt like, I'm here, I have to pursue that. And it was so exciting to see what different avenues I could pursue, studying Alzheimer's. There's so many different ways. You can look at it on a molecular level, like what genes are involved in it, on a cellular level, how are they disrupted in Alzheimer's disease? And then on like a clinical, like, cognitive kind of level and diagnostic side. And that's kind of where I'm at. So my mom, of course, has been super supportive of me through all of this. And I think just the fact that I was exposed to the medical profession my whole life, and then having that happen to my nanai having dementia really solidified in me that this was going to be something that I was excited to pursue. And it can be a little tough sometimes to deal with, but and to think about, but it gives me a drive for doing this and staying in this field. But yeah.
Thank you so much, firstly, for your vulnerability. I know we all really appreciate you sharing your story with us. One of our missions here at PUSO is to amplify the stories of Filipino people here in the US, and also kind of diversify people's idea of what it means to be in biology, and kind of explore different paths that people can take, because as you said, being a healthcare professional definitely isn't for everyone, and people definitely need to find their strengths and kind of capitalize on them. And since you've already shared so much valuable advice with us, is there any closing words or final pieces of advice in general that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I know that everyone who might be listening to this is someone who is trying to explore what career they want to pursue. So that really takes a lot of self-reflection. But also sometimes, even as hard as you reflect, you don't ever really know what type of personality you are, what type of worker you are, until you actually go and do it. For me, I would have never, as an undergrad, say that, oh, I love math and I'm a problem solver and I love new challenges. I was for sure not like that. I failed calculus twice. So it's really ironic because I use really advanced math now for my PhD, because it's applicable and I'm excited about it and it makes sense to me now. But at the time, I hated it because it's so abstract, and it was just what's the point? I'm never gonna calculate how long it takes for sunlight to reach Mars. That didn't matter to me at all. And so when it matters is when you immerse yourself in experiences, to really find that out. So I encourage you to try to look for different opportunities that may just listen to other people talk. You might think, I already know I want to exactly do this, but give yourself the chance to hear what other people's jobs are, like listening to these podcasts, and just networking with other people. Don't be too shy to network with people outside of your circle, so you can really learn about what they do on a day-to-day. But I will say, if you kind of already do know what type of learner you are and all of that, so if you know that you're a problem solver and you really like learning new skills and challenging concepts, and you like to do these kinds of things independently, then I think a career in science is a really great career choice for you. But you still wouldn't even know without trying it, because a career in science in a molecular lab is very different from a career in science in a different type of lab like my lab. So just give it a try. Just try to volunteer in a laboratory, or just chat with a grad student who's a TA in your class, like me. Just to find out, and give yourself that chance, because time at UCI as an undergrad goes by so quickly, and there are so many valuable opportunities here, that you won't find in such a condensed place, out there in the world. So really take advantage of your student status, the fact that you are, pursuing a certain career, and you're only here, for a couple years. So PhD advisors and grad students, they love to, lift up students who show that motivation, who want to learn, even if you don't have all the skills. So I would say just go out there and try to learn more about our different careers, and network, and find a mentor from all of that. So yeah.
Again, thank you so much for all the advice you shared. I think it's really eye-opening and kind of important for us to hear, especially since we are ending off the year pretty soon and people are starting to look for different opportunities and stuff. So before we close off, Mika and I would really like to thank you for being a part of this series. We really appreciate your time and effort, not only into like doing this podcast with us, but also the passion that you put into your work and your schooling as a PhD candidate.
Mhm. And just to reiterate that we are really grateful for your presence as a role model to the Filipinx undergraduates like us who look up to you. And I know for a fact that Kara and I were really amazed when we heard about your work over the summer, and it was one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to invite you here today.
Oh, that means a lot. Thank you.
So in closing, PUSO has a special sign off that we do at the end of like every meeting. So first we shape our hands into hearts, kind of have hearts, and then we cross one hand over each other and then the screen. Yeah. And then Mika, do you want to go ahead?
And then I will count to 3, and then on the third count will be and PUSO. So, okay, ready?
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2, 3. And PUSO. Yay.